Ghosts live here. Katie was a different person at school. Studious, quiet, socially adverse. Public school shoved the last-minute essay that was her charisma into a backpack of timidity. Binders are irrelevant for malnourished documents like this girl. She was bookwormed into the obligation of avoiding peer interaction. Conversing with classmates was too frightening to attempt. Put your head down, get your work done, go home as soon as possible. That was the mantra. No extracurriculars for Katie. Blaringly, this meant unemployment in the friend department. Worried by this apparent workplace and the absence of detail when discussing her day, her parents made attendance mandatory on playdates with the varyingly aged offspring of their colleagues. What they didn't understand was that Katie was 12. She was in middle school. Middle school. How could she be expected to be some kind of social savant when she was forced to hang around 9-year-olds and what effectively amounted to being babysat by the Donaldsons' 16-year-old daughter, Martha? Besides, Martha was such a bore. Not like Katie. Well, not like Katie at home, anyway. It took a journal's worth of failed attempts at sparking civil interest for Mom and Dad to finally back off. Katie was free to be the introvert she was. A gracious dollop of reprieve was Katie's affinity for adults. Though generally 3 or 4 times their junior, she showed a knack for entangling herself with grown-ups, particularly the elderly. Something about accounts of what life was like when people her grandparents' age roamed youthfully enchanted Katie. Kids don't have stories that stack up to that kind of stuff. That is, until Susan appeared. Katie first encountered Susan on the walk home from a skipped school fair. She noticed a small girl peeking from her porch banister. Something about the intellectual awareness of this girl's eyes allowed Katie to drop any skepticism her hands could hold. This wasn't the same type that inhabited her school. Shoulders eased from stiffness. She greeted the recluse and asked for a name. Introducing herself by first and last, the girl gave a brief synopsis of her living situation when subsequently probed. An astute nose could sniff a fellow introvert, someone who had more depth than what dwells adjacent to the pores on her face, someone with a real story. From this moment to the next, Katie marinated in the understanding of the existence of Susan Holcomb. It was here, it was this. Shy Susan was relegated to this neighborhood by her work-consumed parents. She had not found this a particularly easy place to start a new life, as she did not know anyone her age. Public schooling was not an option her kin rendered logical. The matriarch of this tribe, who spent ample time in the confines of the household, found the solvent to engorged boredom in the crafting of her daughter's education. Mind games were played at home. Susan's mother sipped elation in the offsetting of the balance of her child's workload. A crowded checklist of daily tasks would force prioritization. Her little girl would mature before her eyes. She was teaching her daughter real-world skills. Parameters weren't limited to the residence. Unsurprisingly, Susan wasn't allowed to brave the outside world without her mother's permission. Merrymaking is a privilege. To disobey mother's law was to rarefy dinner or any other basic need a child couldn't provide on their own. This had steepened over the course of their time in this town. If she wished to earn ration of such precious amenities, she would obey the charter. This made for a naturally curious, learnedly hesitant Susan. Curious enough to elicit fascination with this potential friend. Hesitant enough not to meet her outside. It was presented that Susan had not always sustained a bureaucratized lifestyle. Prior to her family's move, she had been allowed to sprout in legitimate academies for everyday children. The camaraderie of peers was among her most cherished annuities. Upon having this ripped away from her undersized palms, she sunk into a never-ending longing, garnished by the second guessing of the quality of her perception from the very start. Was she ever any good at interacting with others? It had been so long since she was provided an opportunity to know. Katie was the first girl her age she'd interacted with since moving. The ease of conversation and genuine interest she held in Susan lowered every latch. Minutes wore the regalia of seconds. They finished their interaction, by Susan's estimation, all too quickly, with an offer to do this again tomorrow. Same time, same place, if she wanted to, or whatever. As the next day came about, the girl was infected with anticipation, a nervous exuberance she couldn't appreciate with those closest to her. Sharing this blessing was no risk worth taking. Her parents' probable reaction dangled between unknown and refractory. Sections of the day dedicated to algebra, biology, and homemaking danced on diced glass. Susan wanted to jump out of this window of torment and into conversation with the light of her day. When the novel ally eventually visited her, companionship was easier to enjoy than what imagination could invent. After a brief series of coded hints at the original meeting point, the two greeted between the grace of a bathroom window. Mother was on the prowl. Only the sanctity of the most private of rooms would suffice for this rendezvous. Whispers of hobbies, pet peeves, and favorite films evolved into the sharing of treasured drawings, confectious secrets, and incalculable ambition. The pair, in the passing of the coming months, understood each other far beyond the constrictions of what a progenitor could comprehend. Relation grew between the two. They became near as sisters, separated only by a few fences and yards. Visits between different alcoves of the house's border preserved the autumn of discovery. Ultimately, the couple needed more. Amalgamation of plaster, chicken wire, and sheetrock hampered what could be true communion. So, upon attentive consideration, Katie and Susan decided to sneak out to Sufferer's Woods together. The operation launched an hour after Susan's bedtime. She wasn't entirely sure when her mother and father retired, but it was safe enough. Head and arm out of the window, her eyes met with those of her companion. Finding an excuse to be away from home was not a difficult task for Katie. Exhilarated by the sudden news of having a regular daughter with interest in others her own age, Mom and Dad easily let her stay late at school to see a softball game. They were even permissive when plans were updated to allow a post-match function at a player's house. Katie wouldn't be out too long, after all, and would get a ride home. Softball moms are overbearingly accommodational. 12 minutes past the start time of this supposed social was when Katie first touched Susan. Hand in hand, they traipsed through the outer green of the Holcomb estate. A dim flashlight hung snug between the warmth of coated bodies. Thinning air tickled thick expectations. Nocturnal buzz grew to cold chatter quicker than the girls expected. Trust wrapped against tightening mitts, they stepped into the woods. Only Katie had been to this preserve before, but was fairly certain she remembered a clearance of foliage within this domain. It had been a while since her last visit out here, but she couldn't be making up the memory, right? Maybe this wasn't such a fantastic idea after all. In concept, their evening would be that of an adventurous bonding session, but that was rapidly looking like a farce. Colossal, dying trees with canopies of black stood tall above the gate of crackling leaves. Cries of bloodied owl nests scored a chorus of catatonia. 1,000 motherless men's whistles formed inimical gale. The questioning of every decision leading up to this moment crept along increasingly apprehensive vertebrae. Until Katie kissed the glacial cheek of her partner. It would be all right, she assured the both of them. Everything's gonna be okay. Someone had to be the rock. Swiftly, the brash conditions of the polar woods slid into minuscule perforations of adrenaline. The perilous glory of this quest reared its head confidently into the fields of arbor. Tentative march became full, unencumbered gait as the girls found themselves gleefully racing into the heart of the trees. No mind was paid to denotation of landmark. The general direction of forward was all the mapping the explorers needed. Katie knew there would be a field. Both of them knew there would be. And all at once, there was. Beyond draped toes stood the Garden of Eden, a mystical maze of love. Couples and pairs and apples and pears waited patiently for those above. Come down in our trenches, sit on the benches, make friendships and knit the common glove. The kindred allies knew what to do. Fate had only given its disciples a shove. So Katie and Susan set course. Emancipation in the trek down the small decline towards glistening parish. Knees and elbows dripped veneer towards the same being they gravitated. The earthbound path turned into a careful, four-limbed effort not to topple. Depth perception would be gone until morning. The descent was steeper than expected, but this only guaranteed ultimate privacy. Souls landed on basin. Katie and Susan locked eyes. At last, the two could experience their bond. No naysayers, no rules. What Katie saw in the eyes of Susan was the same on the other side of the mirror. Far-stretching pools of bronze and cashmere, a comfort fit for this majestic stage. Everlasting arms stretched to the cosmic reaches of the universe. Humming stars serenaded prickly ears. Father Time stood still, and Mother Nature listened. Katie and Susan embraced so perfectly intimate that Susan was no more. A gentle evaporation or a stark reveal, either effect would pierce Katie's chest. The will so wanting to make normal this quirk-ridden girl betrayed its host in her finest moment. Pools of tears drowned in the bottomless ocean, suffocated by frustration and loss. Couldn't she tear her stomach out from the gape formerly belonging to her heart? This feeling she wanted desperately to stop only swaddled her innards, forcing shrieks of clemency from a sinking diaphragm. She hurled anguish at the surrounding trees. They did not stop their observation. The druids of old, fortified in their skin of bark, presented no cure for the girl. Alone, wind, soil, and vegetation had all turned their back to Katie. The only remaining friend was the supple, intoxicating dark. Wings outstretched, this time Katie held close the night. All remaining color was banished from the earth, and Katie woke in simple field, level with her surroundings, no wall of root to climb back up, flat as her heart rate. She would need to find the way back to her town. A town. There was no domicile awaiting her. She did not have a home. She only lived. Sorry limbs hung lifelessly from her shoulders. Rigid legs dragged along environmental debris. Katie stepped back into the world.